Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. My name is Joe. I'm the host. Thank you for joining today. And last night I was in bed about to fall asleep, which is where I seem to do my best thinking. Semi-conscious and under the influence of Benadryl or melatonin. Sometimes both. But anyway, I'm overly critical of words, and I get impressed by people that are colorfully descriptive. Like they're just telling you something ordinary, a meal they made for breakfast, but it sounds like they're reading from a novel. I love that. And it makes me hyper-fixated on words and their usage. I'm weird. We all know this. But anyway, I'm in bed. I don't recall what it was in reference to, but I thought, don't you dare. And sometimes you can break up a contraction for emphasis, like a sign that says, do not park, versus if it were to say, don't park. I might park there because it feels less important. So, don't you dare. Do not you dare? That doesn't make sense to me. And that sent me spiraling into who gets to decide these language idiosyncrasies. And is this why people write a letter to their congressman? I've never done that before, but I need action on this. I said all that to say I'm sleepy today because my brain is a menace to my well-being. If this is your first time listening to 10-Minute Murder, please subscribe now so that you can catch up on all the back episodes and never miss any new ones. Connect with me on social media and see the visuals that we're talking about here in the podcast. And if you like this episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple or any place that's possible. Your positive feedback is appreciated. You can go to 10minutemurder.com for all things 10-Minute Murder. Now, to today's story. Paris Bennett was born October 10th, 1993. His father quickly abandoned him, leaving Paris to be raised by his mother, Charity. Charity led a difficult life, becoming a heroin addict as a teenager, but when she got pregnant with Paris while in a halfway house, she began to turn her life around. For the first 8 years of his life, Paris Bennett seemed like a perfectly normal child. In fact, he wasn't just ordinary or normal. He was exceptional. He had a genius-level IQ. He loved art and had a creative, intellectual way of viewing the world. If there were any signs of the violence and cruelty he would grow up to inflict, they were well hidden, until the day that Charity told her son that she was going to have another baby. Paris was furious that he would have to share his life with a sibling. He was so upset whenever Charity spoke about her pregnancy or Paris's future sibling, he would storm out of the room. Hearing this, you might think that Paris's hatred of his sibling would only increase once Charity gave birth, but in fact, the opposite happened. As soon as Paris met his baby sister Ella, all of the anger he'd shown seemed to evaporate immediately. From day one, Paris adored his little sister. But things for Charity and her children were about to get more difficult. For the second time in her life, the father of Charity's young baby left, and Charity was once again a single mother, this time to 2 young children. The stress began to get to her. After so long battling for sobriety, Charity began using cocaine again. Ella was too young to notice her mother's erratic behavior during these drug binges, but Paris knew something was wrong. He was used to his mom being reliable, and now she was working long hours and going out on drug binges. Slowly, Paris began to resent Charity. That anger he felt when his mom was pregnant with Ella began to rise to the surface again. Through all of this, Paris and Ella were still close. Despite their age gap, they often played together, and Paris took care of his little sister without complaining. 6 months later, Charity finally stopped using cocaine, but the damage her relapse had caused to her family was harder to fix. They were constantly moving houses, without any kind of stability for the kids, and eventually had to move in with Charity's mom. It was a day like any other when Paris and Ella were playing together, and Paris broke one of Ella's toys. Charity punished Paris for breaking the toy and making Ella cry, and something inside Paris seemed to snap. He grabbed a large knife from the kitchen and began walking around the house with it, and when his mother and grandmother chased after him, Paris turned and began brandishing the knife at them. Eventually, the 2 women managed to de-escalate the situation and confiscate the knife, but the way they viewed Paris would never be the same. Charity arranged to have Paris evaluated in a psychiatric facility. The facility staff found out that the young boy had an obsession with killing, especially shooting. He was also experiencing suicidal ideation and would sometimes repeatedly smack his head against a wall until he drew blood. Despite all of this evidence that Paris was anything but okay, the hospital discharged him after 1 week and told Charity that there was nothing wrong with her son. Charity finally was able to move the kids out of her mom's house, and the three of them relocated to Texas, where she got a steady job working at a restaurant. She often had late shifts, so she'd hire a babysitter to look after Paris and Ella, who were now 13 and 4 years old. On the 4th of February, 2007, Charity was working another night shift when a police officer arrived at the restaurant, asking to speak with her. The officer told Charity that she needed to come with them because Ella had been hurt. Charity immediately panicked, asking to see Ella, but the officer had to break the news to her. Ella was dead. After Charity had left for her shift, a chain of events quickly unfolded. Paris had managed to convince the babysitter that she didn't need to stay for the whole shift, and the babysitter had agreed, leaving the two kids alone at approximately 10 p.m. Immediately afterwards, Paris walked to Ella's room with a kitchen knife in hand. He stabbed the 4-year-old a total of 17 times. Leaving Ella's bloody body in her room, Paris made a phone call to a school friend, and the pair talked casually for just over 5 minutes. During this conversation, Paris didn't seem distressed at all. He talked like it was any other day. After saying goodbye to his friend, Paris then made a call to 911. He didn't try to hide what he had done, instead telling the 911 operator that he had accidentally killed his sister because he had been hallucinating and thought she was a demon. He was urged to perform CPR on Ella, but Paris repeatedly insisted that he knew for sure that she was dead and that CPR would not help. Despite Paris's reluctance, the operator insisted and talked him through the process, getting Paris to count out loud while he performed the chest compressions. Obediently, Paris did, or at least the operator believed that he had. When the police examined Ella's body, it was immediately clear that Paris had not attempted to perform CPR. He had just been sitting there, counting out loud, trying to trick the operator into believing that he was attempting to help. There had been no part of Paris that wanted to try to bring Ella back to life. She was dead, and he wanted her to stay that way. Regardless, Paris had openly confessed to killing Ella, and he was taken into custody. During his interview at the police station, Paris stuck to the same story, that he had hallucinated that Ella was a demon and ended up accidentally killing her. This time, he fleshed out the story a little more, telling the interviewer that he'd fallen asleep next to Ella, and when he woke up, his sister was laughing hysterically at him while covered in flames. None of the investigators believed him for a second. They knew that he had lied about performing CPR, and even though he was pretending to sob while retelling the story, there were no actual tears in his eyes. Paris had killed Ella in cold blood, but why? Through all of this, Charity desperately wanted to believe that Paris hadn't killed Ella on purpose, but as the investigation went on, it became harder and harder to believe. Ella's autopsy revealed parts of Paris's motive, which was even more horrific than investigators anticipated. The extent of Ella's true injuries had been masked by her stab wounds. She had also been beaten and choked by Paris. The worst piece of evidence came in the form of semen, which belonged to Paris, that was found in Ella's bedsheets, as well as in the pants Paris had been wearing on the night Ella died. Paris hadn't just murdered his 4-year-old sister, he'd also sexually assaulted her. When investigators began looking into this side of Paris, they quickly discovered more evidence that he'd been obsessed with violent pornography, searching up terms like sadism and bondage. Hours before Ella died, Paris had been looking at snuff films, which are highly illegal videos where a person is killed on camera, usually for sexual gratification. With all of this evidence, Charity had to accept the facts. She confronted Paris about Ella's murder, and as soon as she flatly told her son that she didn't believe his story, his behavior changed immediately. He responded to his mother's statement with one sentence, quote, "Well, it took you effing long enough." During an interview, Paris said that his initial plan had been to kill his mother, but he decided that leaving her alive and murdering his sister would be more effective in causing his mother's pain. Paris was given a 40-year prison sentence, but never showed any remorse for his crime. Paris said, quote, "I knew by doing that I could hurt my mother in the worst possible way, because I had always known as a child that the most devastating thing to my mother would be the loss of one of her children. I found a way to take both of her children in one fell swoop." Paris's motive was simple. He wanted to hurt his mother, and he succeeded. On one of Charity's visits to jail, Paris attempted to choke her to death, but eventually let her live. To this day, he does not regret the killing, and in 2027, he will be eligible for parole.